Rosalie, thank you so much for talking to me. I've been like stalking you a little bit for a while because I saw about your book, but also your Instagram and Substack. But then I heard this interview with you on Creative Pep Talk and it just made my head explode. So I was like, oh my God, we have to talk about artist residencies.
Oh, well, it's very fitting because I've been stalking you back. I've been seeing
Yay.
I get fed your stuff on Substack all the time. And every time I'm like, oh, she like blends books and watercolor and nature and writing. Those are all the things that I love. So yeah, I was thrilled when you reached out.
Yeah, I love this. Well, maybe catch everybody up on this whole idea of how you got into doing artist residencies for the first time.
Sure. So I was about 24 when I started applying to artist residencies, and my dad just sent me a link to national park artist residencies. It had a map of all the different ones all over the park system in the US. And there are a lot, maybe over 100. I mean, somewhere around there. And even like kind of obscure, like national monuments have residencies
Mhm.
sometimes, not just the big ones. So I thought it was interesting, and I was in the early stages of trying to establish myself as a nature-focused illustrator. So I've been building up this portfolio of flora and fauna, but it was like not very good. I like did not have too many things in my portfolio, but it was enough to like show some consistency and to show that I was pretty interested in pursuing nature illustration. So I figured I would give it a shot, and I applied for three different national park artist residencies. I um, applied for a couple at like more obscure ones because I thought they would have fewer applicants, and then I applied to Great Smoky Mountains National Park and kind of thought I would never get that one because it seemed competitive. It's the most visited national park in the United States, which is surprising, but it is. Um, but I ended up getting that one, and it was interesting because that year they were actually looking for emerging artists, and they just so happened to have this intern who was very into fungi on their staff who was helping to review these applications. And that person really was like, can we please, like, this person's young and they really like this stuff that I like. And so they really, I think they're the reason that I got it, even though I did not have a great portfolio. So that was kind of my like intro. I went to Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 6 weeks and lived in the park in ranger housing. And
Wow.
yeah, so that was uh, in 2018. And then since then, I've done about seven, I think. I don't know. I always lose track, but yeah.
That's amazing. So, okay, so this first one now, how close do you live to there? Because you're within
About,
range, kind of.
yeah, it was about 8 hours by car.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you're not flying across the country. You're like
No.
close-ish to home.
Yeah.
And so what do they give you? Like what do they provide you with? And then like what do they expect?
Yeah, so a lot of the national park ones, they only provide housing. A few have a stipend. Sometimes the national park residencies will go through a foundation that's like a little separate, and then those ones usually have some sort of stipend, which is nice. But usually just housing. So I stayed in a ranger cabin that was very mousy, but it was fine because I was young enough that it didn't bother me. Uh, but yeah, stayed in the housing there, and they had a volunteer coordinator who was like my point person, and she kind of took me around, showed me some of her favorite spots to like go swimming in the rivers, and introduced me to like the superintendent of the parks of Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And that was pretty cool. And then in exchange, they asked me to teach a workshop.
Okay.
And so I got to pick whatever I wanted to do. And that was my first ever workshop. So I was very, very nervous.
Right.
But it ended up just being like a beginner nature journaling class to park rangers so that they could then use those tools for their interpretive work. And then they also asked me to donate a piece of art, and that seems pretty standard for a lot of places. And
Hmm.
usually they don't make you give like your best piece that you
Hmm.
create. It's like anything that you want to offer. But for this one, they said that they were looking for some way to engage the little kids that were coming to the park for the synchronous firefly displays in June, which is when I was
Oh,
there. So they're this special kind of firefly that flash at the same time to attract their mates. And people come from all over the world to see it. And so they're all waiting in the woods for hours until the fireflies start to flash. And they were looking for an activity for those people. And so they asked me if I'd be willing to make like a simple like zine, just about why the fireflies are doing this. And it was like a colorable thing. So just outlined art.
oh wow.
Yeah, and that was awesome too because I got to like work with a ranger to get the information right. And it was one of my very first times sort of collaborating with an organization to
Mhm.
create some sort of environmental education piece. And a little light bulb went off like, oh, I could, in addition to like just capturing the beautiful things that I find outside with my paintings, I could also work with organizations to help them communicate what they're studying or researching.
So, and it's something I'm really interested in, whether somebody's doing an official artist residency like you're doing, or this thing that I've sort of been talking about on my Substack of like unofficial, like self-appointed, just declare yourself the artist in residence of something, is
Mhm.
like it kind of changes the meaning of the art project when you've sort of given yourself a title. Um, and also, I think there's something in the nature of a residency that you get to define it. Like, it's not like you were an artist for hire and the national park said, we need 12 illustrations of mushrooms and 12 of acorns. Please go do this work. Like, you're like, your response as an artist to this place is specific to you. So it
Mhm.
like, I feel like what it does is it empowers you to say, when I make art about this place, it's like this. In other words, I don't have to be comprehensive. I don't have to represent someone else's point of view. This is completely about what my connection to this place is like, which is different from what anyone else's connection would be. Does that
Yeah.
sound right? Is that
Yeah, yeah, and I think that that's what has really made artist residencies, whether official or unofficial, a big part of what I do because I can just go and I like try to tie up loose ends with other projects that I'm working on before I start a specific project in a specific place. And then I just become as present as possible there and I just see what comes out. And I've kind of learned over the years of doing them that uh there are a couple different approaches that people take. Some people have a specific project in mind going in, and they
okay?
are using this as like, I have to concentrate. I'm gonna like create this book proposal in this 1 month. And then
Mhm.
other people just kind of go and soak things up and see what comes out. And I think
Right.
for me, I've done both in different seasons when I've kind of needed different um,
Mm.
sort of processes. But most of them are very open to, yeah, you just make it what you need it to be. Um, and there are some that do have like more strict uh, deliverables, and I kind of stay away from those because I don't
Oh,
know.
that's
That's
interesting.
that's
Okay.
kind of like what I do normally. I'm often working with deliverables and deadlines, and so
Right.
residencies seem like a break from that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do feel like whether you are working with an organization to do a residency or just immersing yourself in a place, it does give you a sense of like purpose for being there if you call it an artist residency.
Mhm. Yeah. And you had 8 weeks this first one. Is that what you
It was
said?
around 6 weeks, yeah, but
Six
it was
weeks?
a chunk of time.
That feels like a transformative chunk of time.
Oh yeah. Yeah, for many reasons. A secondary reason was I had never really hiked by myself for like long full day
Oh.
hikes. And so I experienced, as I talked about in the Creative Pep Talk episode, a lot of fear being in this place and hiking solo as a woman. But
Mhm.
I had the opportunity to just like every day push through that and gain more confidence. So it was very transformational for me. And I'm so glad they took a chance on me. And I've applied to so many residencies since then, and my portfolio is much stronger. And yeah, I get rejected all the time. Like this
Oh.
past week, I got 2 rejections. I've put out 5 applications for 2025, and 2 of them I've heard back on, and I got rejected from both. And it's just so funny because it's like
Yeah.
I was such a newbie and they took a
Right.
chance on me. And now, it's you just never know. You never know who's going to be selecting. So,
Right. Yeah, you never know. And that is, one advantage of the self-appointed artist residency is you
exactly.
can't be rejected. And
Yeah.
the application process is incredibly simple. You just ask
Yeah.
yourself, can I do this? And you tell yourself yes, and you go and do
Yeah.
it. But now I want to hear about some of the other ones that you've done because I want to live vicariously through your whole, like, I love all of this so much.
Okay. So after I did that one, I have done some that are kind of like smaller, like that friends or people in my state. I'm from West Virginia. They've started their own residency programs. And so I've kind of done ones that are like less competitive, and those are just as great. Like, I think there are certain names like McDowell and like Yado. I don't know if you've heard of these different ones
Sure.
that are
Yeah.
very prestigious. And I'm sure they're great, but also like ones that are just run by people who have like a beautiful cabin on a beautiful farm and offer it up to artists every summer. Like those have been just as good. So I think if you take the prestige out of it, there's just as much to be gained from these different places. So I did one right on the edge of New River Gorge National Park, and that was just some friends of mine had it's like a vacation rental, but in the winter, the national park doesn't see many visitors. And so they basically give this gorgeous place to artists for several months every winter. And that's still going on. And I highly recommend applying for it. It's great. I did one in Maine and with the Audubon Society on a little off-grid island, and that was interesting because it was very isolated. So the Great Smoky Mountains one, it was isolating at times, but I was close enough to park rangers that we would sometimes meet up for different events and stuff. But the main one was mostly me just like out there with the seals and the spookiness of the like mossy Maine woods.
Oh,
And that one was great. Maybe a little too isolated for me. I listened to so many podcasts.
was
To
it very long? Like, how long were you
It
at
was
that
two
one?
and a half weeks.
2.5 weeks.
Yes.
Okay.
And there were stretches where I could go to dinner. So it was an Audubon island, and there was an Audubon camp happening during part of it. So sometimes I could walk a mile to the camp area and go to dinner with people. But then on weekends and some of the weeks or some of the sections, I was just eating out of a cooler. So I would go days without seeing anybody.
Wow.
Um, yeah, so they can be isolating for sure. I feel like yeah, the settings are always dreamy and lovely, but also it's real life too. Like I remember during that main one, just I had really bad migraines during that 2.5 week thing. So just like, as with
Yeah.
anything, like it's it's magical, but also very normal. So other ones that I've done include, let's see. Oh, I went to Desert National Wildlife Refuge, and that was a really cool one because I got to help create this program. So I knew a park ranger who was there. This is in Nevada in the Mojave Desert. And he knew that I'd done a few, and he was interested in starting one out there. And so they met with me a few times before I got there, and they just asked, like, we don't know anything about artist residencies, but we think it's cool, and we have this really nice place for that people could stay. And so I basically just outlined what we talked about, like how they usually work. Like you usually have some sort of donated artwork or workshop that you teach in exchange for housing. But other than that, you have the whole time to yourself. And so I kind of made like a document with best practices,
Wow.
and then I went out and did that for a few weeks, and then that program continued. I think they're in their fourth year. So it's cool because I think once people realize that residencies aren't a lot of work on, like, organizations, it's not a lot of work on their end to get one
Sure.
going. Like if you have a place for people to stay that's reasonably comfortable, you can have a residency.
Right. And
So,
so going into like a lot of these smaller residencies, going into them, did you have wildly different ideas about what you wanted to do? Or do you go into the majority of them just saying, I am coming to make art about this place and to discover maybe new ways of working or expand my way of making art in a place a little more? Like
mhm.
what have some of your deliverables or lack of deliverables been on some of these?
I would say the first couple were a bit scattered. It was just like, oh, I saw this cool mushroom this morning. I'm going to try to paint it this afternoon. And that's
Yeah.
often how it works. Most of my residencies have been outdoors based. So I'll like go exploring in the morning and then come back and work in the afternoon and evening. So the first two, I was just painting whatever. And then the New River Gorge one, I decided I thought it would be cool to try to do an illustrated map of the park. I'd never taken on, I'd done like an illustrated map of my parents' farm for a present, but I never done like a big one. And so that was a cool challenge because I made it a point to meet the park naturalist and also like introduce myself at the ranger station to let them know what I was working on and see. It's really fun to like ask people that are very familiar with these places, like, what's your favorite tiny creature you found? Or like, what icon do you think is under visited in the park? Um, and it's just a way to make those experiences more like personal and less isolating. Because if you do just like stay in your little cabin the whole time, it could be depressing. So
Yeah.
the illustrated map was a goal for one. Another, so the Desert National Wildlife one, my goal was to work with gouache and get better with gouache. And so I did not bring any watercolors on that residency, which I have used watercolor for most of my art making life. So that was a big
Yeah.
move. Even though they're so similar, now I'm looking back, it's like not that big of a leap, but then it felt like,
Oh yeah.
and I was using them in a very different way too. With the gouache, I was trying to use it like really thick and bold and flat colors and like taping off my edges to have like crisp lines. So it was more of like a little bit of a pop art look I
Uh-huh.
was trying out. And that yielded some really interesting stuff. Uh, and then one residency that I did this past year was at a place called Wild Acres in North Carolina. And that was a short one. It was only a little over a week. And I was so burnt out after finishing my newest book. I
Mm-hmm.
just had like so many big pushes to get everything done. And so I was like kind of dreading it. I had applied for it a year before, and then the time came and I was like, I do not want to make art. This is
Oh.
the last thing I want to do. So I hardly brought any supplies. I think I brought like just some sketching stuff, like basic sketching things. And I spent that whole time just like walking slowly through the woods and doing whatever the heck I wanted. And it was one of my favorite artist residencies because it showed me that like you can use these place-based experiences just to like let a place hold you and take care of you for a little while. And it was just such a comforting place in the mountains of North Carolina. Like everything's cozy and it was fall, so the leaves are beautiful. And I just like let myself just be in that place. And the things that came out of it, I did a few creative things, but they were like really random. Like I realized I wanted to glue leaves onto a canvas, like do a leaf collage, which I'd never done before. And so I went to a Dollar General and I got hot glue and I glued leaves on a canvas and it was the best day ever.
Oh wow. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need that.
Totally. Yeah, no, I think that's such a good point. Is it's not just about output, but it's also about input, right? Like
Yeah.
what can the place give you, not just what can you produce
Yeah.
about or for the place.
Yeah, and I think I've also learned that, like in the beginning, I was just trying to find my audience and all of that stuff that you do when you're a self-employed
Mhm.
artist. And so I often used these experiences to bring other people along. And so I'd like announce that I was doing this thing, and then I'd try to help people feel like they were coming along with me and show them my works in progress. And so I ended up doing a lot of like sharing about the experiences. And then more recently, I've kind of realized I want to have the experience. I can take pictures, I can journal about what's happening. And then once I've had time to reflect, then I share about it if I want to. And that takes the
Mhm.
pressure off because, like, with the Wild Acres one where I created like childlike crafts the whole time, if I had said in the beginning, like, hey, I'm doing this thing, follow along, see what I make, then I would have felt this pressure to like make really cool stuff. But
Right.
it's nice to give yourself like that buffer time just to be there and see what the experience needs to be for you.
Yeah. And so I think that's an interesting thing. If you're going, well, whether you're doing an official artist residency or you're just appointing yourself artist in residence of something, that you can decide how to like share it with the world or not.
Hmm.
Like if you want to be the artist in residence of the park down the street, you can do that in your sketchbook and never tell anyone.
Hmm.
Or you can share it on social media, or you could like invite your friends over when it's over and just show it to them and like have a little party. Like, so it's interesting that you've kind of gone back and forth on what the meaning of it is in terms of like how you communicate it to people. Like the organization is going to sort of communicate it in their own way if it's
Hmm.
an official one, but like how you voluntarily choose to put it out there or not, and when and how is an interesting question, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's nice
And
to take the pressure off.
right, take the pressure off. Yeah, I think when you obligate yourself to like, I'm going to post about this every day on Instagram or something, then that can be defining it too much, and then
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, right. So, and at what point in all of this did it occur to you, like, I could just do this on my own? I don't, like,
Mm.
I don't have to apply. What would that look like?
Yeah. I think it was a couple of years ago. Well, actually, 2020 was my first sort of unofficial artist residency. And I didn't think
Okay.
of it in this term, but then as soon as I saw you write your essay on unofficial artist residencies, I was like, oh, yeah, that was definitely what I did with that. So 2020, I had a show booked for March 2020
Yeah, right.
at an art gallery in West Virginia. And I was able to do whatever I wanted for it. And I had that previous fall stumbled upon a bog. For the first time, I'd seen little bits of bogs, different places, boardwalks and stuff, but I never been in a huge one, and I never been in one that like what had so many carnivorous plants and was just
Mm.
stunningly beautiful. And I visited this bog in West Virginia, fell in love with it, and just really loved all the crazy colors and the weird plants and everything. And so I decided to make my show about the plants of the bog and of this specific bog.
Mhm.
And so I did 15 giant watercolors. I never worked larger than like maybe
Ooh,
11 by 17 before, and these were like 2 by 3 feet. So for
2 by
watercolors,
3 watercolors. Were you
yeah.
with huge brushes? Like, did you get those?
Oh,
Oh, okay. Little brushes,
no.
big
Little
paper.
brushes, big paper,
Okay, I got it.
lots of audiobooks.
Right, right.
Sitting
Yep,
down.
I get it.
Yeah. So yeah, each piece I was just a really enlarged small plant from this specific bog called Big Run Bog, and
Cool.
pulled up this gallery, and eventually it did open. It just took like 2 months for it to
Sure.
open, after that. But that was my first time realizing like, oh, I had this amazing like immersive experience in this place, and I didn't have to like get selected to be
Yeah.
there. I just went there, and it was like 10 miles down the road, so it was really easy to access. I didn't need to live in the bog. I just like went there on weekends. And
Right.
yeah, and it was great. And it had a big impact. There were a lot of people that came to that show who lived right around there and said, like, oh, where did you find all these things? And I'm like, 10 miles away, you can go
Yeah.
too. So
Right.
yeah, so I didn't need like a bigger organization
Sure.
promoting this to be able to have an impact. That was really awesome. And then
Oh,
Uh,
let me ask you though. So the bog, does the bog have an organization attached to it? Like is it managed by a agency who,
um, I believe it's through the National Forest
oh,
Service.
okay.
Yeah.
So they didn't, they never, did they ever know that you did this? No,
Nope.
no. Okay.
No. And I could have like contacted them and tried to like market it more, but I don't know. Sometimes I don't
Yeah.
want to do that.
Right. You're just like,
Like,
this is just me doing my thing here.
yeah, and
I
it
don't need
already
to,
had a purpose. Like the
yeah,
purpose was for it to be in a show and for people to stumble upon that show.
right.
And I think I'm learning, yeah, like some things don't need to be everything. They can just be for one specific audience. You don't have to
Yeah,
share it super widely. And
right. Yeah, interesting. Okay, and so like what tell us about a couple other ones. Like what are some
okay,
other examples?
so another example was a few years, actually, maybe a little bit before the bog one. I started just a project called Tiny Worlds of West Virginia. And so every month I just went out and I looked for an interesting little creature and I learned about it and painted it. It was very straightforward. But then I would share the original on my website and my newsletter and talk a little bit about what I'd learned about it. So I did that for about a year, and that planted the seed of being very interested in illustrating tiny things.
Right.
And I realized that a lot of these little critters are very underrepresented in the arts. I think there are so many. I think they're becoming more popular now, but for a while, like there was not a market for mushroom art, for example. Like I remember in 2017 taking a series of mushroom greeting cards to an art, like a cool little art shop, and saying like, "Hey, I wholesale these. Would you be interested?" And she was like, "Oh, I just don't think that there is a big enough like market for mushroom stuff." And
Uh,
I'm like, they're everywhere. They're all over
yeah.
Target. Like, so whatever,
Yeah,
lady.
whatever.
Um, so yeah, that project kind of lit this little interest in me that just I did other things over the years since then, but I always kept coming back to the tiny overlooked creatures. And so is it okay if I talk about my book now?
Yes, I want to
Okay.
I'm so blown away by this book.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I have it right here. It's called
Okay. What
Tiny Worlds of the Appalachian Mountains.
what's amazing, show people how thick it is. Like this is
Yeah,
not a little book. This
it's
is like
not.
a this is very substantial and it's so beautiful. If you can just like
Thank
page through
you.
just so
Sure.
like we can
Yeah.
see the balance of like art versus text because you did
Yeah.
writing here. Well, you're gonna have to tell us about the whole journey, but let's just
Yeah,
see what the
let's see if I can do this without. Hang
you
on.
can. Yeah,
My
no, it's
shoulder.
good. It's good.
So yeah, it's like this is really awkward.
No, it's okay. It's just like it's a lot of
Yeah.
art, but
A lot
also
of
plenty of
words, a lot of
text. Yeah.
paintings, tons of paintings.
Oh,
That's
so
better.
gorgeous.
Lots of illustrated maps. I have some full page or full spread scenes. I wanted it to be very immersive. So,
Unbelievable.
well, thank you.
All right. So, in what order did all this happen? Like the idea to do the journey versus the book and finding the publisher? Like, what was the sequence of events here?
Okay, so sequence of events was spring of 2021. I was feeling the itch to have like a long-term project
Uh-huh.
because I had spent the past 4 years or so doing a lot of freelance illustration work and creating products for my shop, which were very fun, but they're kind of like all one-off type things. And I just really wanted to like spend a long time learning about one topic. And
Yeah.
and I wanted to have the time to make work that like a body of work where I could feel myself improving as I went because it was so
Mhm.
many. And
Yeah.
so I was thinking like what could that possibly be? And it didn't take long for me to kind of go back to that tiny worlds idea that I'd started a few years before and just like there's so much more there than just what's in West Virginia. And through that project, I only captured 12 critters. There are thousands of species in the Appalachian Mountains. And so I just went on a walk one day in the spring, and it was right before I was about to get married, and so it was like weird timing, but I had this idea of like, oh, this should like I really want to illustrate all the tiny creatures that I can find on a big trip through the Appalachian Mountains. And so many people are familiar with the Appalachian Trail. And at
Yeah.
first I thought maybe we could hike the Appalachian Trail. And then I kind of read more about other artists' experience with trying to do big projects while through hiking a huge trail that
Mm,
takes 6 months. And a lot of them had a hard time with it because it's just so exhausting.
sure.
And also I wanted to grow as an artist. And so I didn't want to do just quick sketches. I wanted to like really put my time into it. And that didn't
Hmm.
seem great for through hiking. So then originally the plan was a year-long trip, and then that got pared down to 6 months because I realized that most of the plants and animals will be out between like April and October. The winter
Right.
is pretty hard to find these things. So we started planning. I say we because by that time I was married, and so I had this other person to think about,
Yes.
and he was helpful. But I knew it would be pretty pricey to find extended stay rentals throughout the mountain range. But it actually worked out because we moved out of our apartment, so we didn't have to pay rent during it.
Okay.
And then we just like applied that to discounted Airbnbs. We'd often stay 2 or more weeks to get those discounts. And then we'd
Hmm.
intersperse it with camping and backpacking trips. And so we ended up leaving a full year after I had the idea because I wanted to apply for grants and I wanted to find a publisher first. I think my brain really likes to have like a deadline and
Yes.
a container. A lot of
Yes.
artists don't, they're not like container artists. They just like make things and then they figure out how to share it. But for me, it's really like comforting to know what something is generally going to be. So
Hmm.
the way I found my publisher is I went to an REI store and I looked in the book section for creative conservation focused books. And I made
Love
a
it.
list of everything that I learned, including like the names of the editors, a very sneaky little business. Um,
Absolutely. This is absolutely the thing that everyone should do.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
100%.
great. I mean, they give their names in the book, so
Yes.
why not Google them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I had a short list of like 3 different publishers that made really beautiful books and contacted them all. And I heard back from 2 of 3 of them and had conversations with them. And it turned out that the one publisher really wanted something that was more commercial. So they wanted it to be based on either the national parks or the Appalachian Trail itself, but
Mm-hmm.
not the whole mountain range. And the mountain range is so much bigger than just the trail. It extends way further south and way up into Canada.
Okay.
So it felt like silly to me to like only focus on this 2 foot wide little path, which
Yeah,
the path is great. It's awesome. I love it. And we did use it as like a guide, but
sure.
I didn't want it to be that book. And I knew this is going to take me years to make. The book advances are not even going to cover the
No.
travel expenses. So
Right.
this needs to be a book that I really want to make.
Yes.
That was nice having that like confidence going in and maybe some of that came from like having these ideas that I like kind of executed by myself before like the bog show
Hmm.
that like I knew that I wanted to do this project and it was going to be a book. And so I just kind of had this assurance that like I'm going to make the book I want to make and then we'll see if I need to self-publish I can, but I'm
Yeah.
going to make the book that I want to make. So
That's so important. And it sounds like you found a publisher who was on board with that. Yeah,
yeah, I did. Yeah, I ended up working with Mountaineers Books in Seattle, and they've
they're great.
been a dream team. They were
Yeah.
really, really good, and they didn't ever try to like tell me that I needed to make something more marketable. Yeah, they basically, I feel like they just took my vision and they gave it a glow up. That's how I describe
Love
it.
it.
Like made everything a little more polished and beautiful,
Yeah.
but they weren't pushy at all, and that was great. So then I had a book deal and I had
Mhm.
2 uh, grants to help fund the travels. And they were small. It wasn't like a huge thing, but it still definitely helped. And then set out in April of 2022. And it was a 6-month continuous road trip all the way up to Newfoundland, where the Appalachian Mountains end. And Basically, I just went outside every day and kind of often started with more urban nature settings. So we'd like stay in these little small towns kind of along the like the ridge line of the Appalachian Mountains. And we'd stay in each place for a couple of weeks. So I would spend the first couple of days just walking out from where we were staying and look at urban nature or little city parks, and I would take pictures and I would sketch what I saw. I did some nature journaling, and then I would come back in the afternoons, just like I did with all my regular artist residencies. I just come back in
Yeah.
the afternoon and try to like channel the most interesting thing that I'd seen that day into a painting like quickly. Like something that I loved about this project was I wanted it to be a lot of observations and paintings. And so I knew I couldn't overthink things too much. And I usually do. So
Yeah.
I would just like have that cool experience in the morning. And then I would come back and I would paint it. And I would try to just like really channel that energy from that morning into the
Wow.
work.
And so the paintings that you made in the moment, did a lot of those end up in the finished book? Did they all end up in the finished book?
You mean like in the field while I was out and
Yeah.
about? Or
Well,
um
the ones you would come back and make in the afternoons, like, what
oh,
is there, like some of them ended up, but then others you
all of
redid
them ended up
later?
in the book.
All
Yeah.
of them.
All of
Wow.
them did. It's funny though, because I just found my journal from September of 2022, and it was like I had a week left of this trip. We were about to head home, and I was like all stressed out because I didn't think I had nearly enough paintings. Like I
Mhm.
thought that I would get the bulk done during that time, and I just was seeing so many more cool things than I could paint or
Yeah.
record. And so I only had about probably maybe 30% of the paintings done at the end of the trip. And then the whole next year, I worked on the paintings and I kept a log of interesting things that I saw every day. It was just like a running Google Doc. So I had to say the location and the date and the time. And if I could identify it to species, I'd do that. But often I couldn't. So I like attached pictures from every angle so that if I wanted to use it for the book, I could ask an expert and show them all my pictures and everything. So I had that to work from. But yeah, a year
I love that.
after,
I love that idea of keeping a log of
yeah.
what ideas. Um, I think that's so important. I was in Venice and I kept thinking of ideas for like art projects I wanted to do. And I was finally like, I need to be writing this down. Like I'm in such an inspiring place right now, but I know I'm going to get home and be jet lagged and it's going to be gone. So I just want to like flag that for people. Like, even if you
Yeah,
just have a little notebook in your back pocket to write things down as they occur to you in a setting
yeah.
like this.
Or even your notes app on your phone. Like I
Yeah,
got a
totally.
special
Yeah.
cute little moleskin that I thought I would write everything down, and I started to. And it's just more practical sometimes to pull out your phone and jot things down.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So most of my book there is a lot of text in the book. I wrote way more than I expected because I just realized that the artwork was a bit disjointed without
Mhm.
more text context. And so I wrote most of the book just in the notes app on my phone while walking. Usually I'd just like sit on a stump and write something, and then later I would edit
Wow.
it.
I love that. That's so interesting. So like as a writer, like mostly I'm a professional writer
Uh-huh.
and I never do that. Like
Uh-huh.
I'm so interested to just think about like, just stop, sit down for a second, write a little bit and keep going. I tend to be much
Yeah.
more of a like I'm at home at my desk working kind of person. So like that's a super interesting good idea too.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, I realized that when I stop moving my body, my brain stops writing. It's really strange.
it's true. It's true.
So, yeah, I really cannot just sit. I can sit down and time myself and paint for 5 hours or whatever, but I
Uh-huh.
cannot do that with writing. And that's been something that made me think that I couldn't ever actually write a book. But once I realized, oh, I'm a walking writer and I can edit later. I'm fine with editing later, but coming up with the fresh stuff, I can't do on my own, like just sitting here. I
Oh my God, I'm a
exercise.
walking writer is just something that I want to like tape above my desk. That's
Yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah, it's freeing.
Yeah. So, and so when you proposed the book, you didn't propose as much writing. And so did you sort of go back later and go, I think this needs more text than we thought, kind of thing?
Yeah, basically that's what
Mhm.
happened. Yeah, it was about 3 months into the trip, and I realized I was just looking. I didn't have a scanner with me, but I took pictures of the paintings I'd done so far, and I have a background in like layout design, so I popped them into InDesign in a book
No.
sort of format, and that was nice to see. Like, okay, how is this coming together? And
Interesting.
I realized as I was flipping through, I don't think people are gonna stay engaged. I realized that I needed more text to describe the observations, and then I also felt like I needed to include more personal stories than I ever wanted to share with the world.
Uh-huh.
So it became there definitely a lot of like little tidbits of memoir style writing because I realized that like if I want this to feel like people are walking with me on a hike, then I need them to feel like I'm a friendly presence to
Yeah.
hang out with. And
Yeah.
so, and also often on hikes, you share more like intimate things that are inspired by what you see outside. And so I tried to capture that. And that ended up being, I think, a good decision, even though I was more nervous for publication date because of that. Um,
Uh-huh.
but everyone's been so kind. So I had nothing to worry about.
Yeah. Well, it's a good point. Readers sort of want a narrator who's sort of acting as a proxy for the reader. Like,
Yeah.
this is what it would be like if you were here. And so I'm
Mhm.
I'm sort of the placeholder for all of you, everyone going on this journey. And so you have to
Yeah.
kind of be willing to be that for people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. And so you have some original art from the book that we can
I
look at?
do. Yeah. So this is a two-page spread in the book.
Oh.
My paintings are long and skinny because the book is 8 by 10, which means that the paintings all have to be 8 by 20.
Hmm.
So that was uh, a weird sort of orientation to learn how
Yeah.
to paint in, but I actually like it. It's kind of fun. So yeah, this some of them don't have much text, just like the title, but then I have like an essay that is accompanied by
Right.
that accompanies this. So
Uh-huh.
and I another thing I realized is that I wanted to include to help people feel like they were actually discovering these things
Yeah.
themselves. I would include my hands sometimes, or like a little shot of like me walking through a cave and different things like
Uh-huh.
that. Because I wanted people to know like these are not, I don't have like an ecology background. I've
Yeah.
taken naturalist classes, but I don't have a degree in it. And I also wasn't like, I don't have all these amazing contacts taking me to like see rare things. It was just going outside in public lands that everybody has access to and looking closely. So I wanted it to feel accessible. Here's another.
These are so beautiful. And so one thing I want to point out to everybody that I learned about you is that you, like me, like it's all analog.
Yeah.
There's nothing happening. And so like I'm seeing the lettering on here and you're
Mhm.
actually, I'm curious, did you like put the lettering on immediately or did you come back later after your publisher had sort of seen it and make choices and then add it? How did you do that?
So it's interesting that you brought that up because a lot of the lettering I actually added on after the book had gone to like my last deadline was over because I created a traveling exhibit with 40 of these
Oh,
originals. And so you have to leave all these spots to add the text in after, but it doesn't make for a very
okay.
good composition if you're just looking at the original in a show. So I
Right.
added some of the lettering in after. So most of the lettering in the book is actually a font. So
It's a
the
font. Yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. But yeah, I love doing things by hand. It makes me so happy and
Totally.
so it's nice to I don't know, it's nice to see that there's still publishers, even if there's small presses that are interested in publishing books that are like hand done, that take a long time, but are so like lovingly rendered.
Yeah. And oh, that's so great. I love it with your notebook and oh my God. And I'm so amazed it didn't occur to me that you're painting the full 2-page spread
Yes.
with these.
Yeah. And I mean, I've never done a book like this before, so I don't know if that's how most people do it, but it
Yeah.
just seemed like the way to do it. I don't know.
Oh, yeah,
I
right, right.
just did it and it worked. Some paintings are like more spot illustrations where it was just like for one to fit on one
Sure.
page. But most of them are full 2-page spreads just because like, oh my goodness, I just like getting lost in an illustration and like
Yeah.
feeling like you can just like swim through.
So this is the size you were doing on the road.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
This is
So,
snakeskin liverwort, just very, very enlarged.
so beautiful. It's just amazing for me to think about you like traveling and working in a format that big. Um,
Yeah.
and like throwing them in the trunk of your car and going on to,
I know. There were so many times when I thought they would all get ruined, like,
right.
in a hot car on a ferry or,
Yeah.
but they were fine. They were fine. I did use really thick watercolor paper. It's 300-pound arches
Sure.
paper. So that helps a lot for
Yeah.
sure.
They're pretty sturdy.
Yeah.
Well, that's incredible. And the book is just it's unbelievable. And I know you've had a good response to it and you've been out giving talks. I've seen pictures of you in front of auditoriums and you've put this traveling exhibit together. So the art is traveling now, which is an incredibly cool piece of all this.
Yeah, yeah. In the same way that I wanted the spreads to feel really immersive, I wanted people to be able to like get up close and personal with it. And I wanted it to feel like a book that had just been like pulled apart that you could walk into.
Yeah.
So that's really fun to see that. And a lot of schools in West Virginia have been taking their kids to field trips to see it. And that is unexpected and really, really cool for me.
Yeah. That's amazing. Well, this has been like almost a whole hour, but tell us what you're like, what's next? Do you have is something else
That's
coming
so
up?
funny. I'm working on a newsletter today called So What's Next?
Yeah, I know.
Because
It's
so
the
many
thing everyone
people,
asks. Yeah,
I
I know.
know, yeah, at all my book talks, people have asked that.
I know.
So what's next? I have several book ideas. One book is about bogs, and I think it would probably be maybe a similar format, probably not quite as many paintings because I this one it was a lot of work. And I don't want to ever feel like each book that I make needs to be like more like bigger, like more impressive. I think that small books or smaller projects,
Yes.
like you can reel it in and then you can go big based on your energy. And I feel like I kind of have the energy for something a little smaller, but that's still very lovingly made, but just like a little more stripped back. So it might be a little more of a nature journal style with like
Hmm.
looser sketches. But I just really love bogs, like I said, and I think they're an underrepresented ecosystem. So
Yeah.
that book, and then I also would love to do a children's book. So I finished my first book dummy for a kid's book, I and I'm now in the process of deciding is it good enough to submit to an agent. So we'll
Right.
see. But yeah.
Yeah.
I think
Well,
I'm hooked on books though, which it seems like you are too. I know you've done like 14 of them or something.
yeah, I mean, a
Yeah.
book is nice because you sort of, it has a sense of legitimacy to it, especially if you get a book contract up front. You're sort of like, okay, there's these people in New York or in Seattle who are waiting for this. So this is real, this exists. And
Yeah.
you can tell people, like, I'm working on this book, which will be published by, Random House. Can
Yeah,
I? And it sort of like opens some doors.
it does.
But it
Yeah.
is also limited. Like you don't wake up in the morning going, what should I do today? Like, you know exactly what you have to do today.
Yeah. Which can be good and bad for sure.
Yes, I know. Yeah. I feel more and more like I want breaks between books where I'm more unstructured and chaotic and
Yeah.
not doing things with measurable outcomes because it is a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
Well,
see how long of a break I give myself. I don't know.
yeah, exactly. Right. I know.
Hard.
Well, I hope everybody checks out your book and also your Substack and comes find you on Instagram and all those things. I'll put links below to everything so people can come and check you out.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Amy. It's been a delight to finally get to meet you and not just be lurking on your pages of your books and on your website.
Oh, this has been amazing. And I'm so blown away with everything you've done. And I actually learned some things and got some really good ideas out of this. And I'm sure everybody else will too.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.